Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hi.
How's it going?
Oh, I'm so great.
How are your sinuses?
Oh, so great. Everything's great. How
Yeah.
are you?
Oh, I'm doing okay. It's been a bit of a tiring week. I feel like I pick up on the energy of the teachers in my life at this time of year, and the energy is not high,
No,
which I understand.
it's not.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
I'm going to keep it real with everyone listening. We just recorded more than half of this episode and it wasn't recording.
Yeah.
So now we're doing this all over again.
Our recorder gave up its battery life in the middle
also-
and corrupted the files, so
It is also being a teacher in May.
it's that feeling.
Feels like you've done a whole bunch of work for no point. That's what it feels like.
Oh,
Okay, so what we said the last time we covered this, which
Yeah.
you all didn't get to hear
No.
because the recorder ate it, we would love if you would sign up for our email newsletter.
We would.
You can go to 16 to 1 and sign up there. I'm sure there's a box somewhere that Chelsea's put that's very convenient and says sign up for our email.
Yeah.
You're going to throw your email in there and our email will email your email. You'll get to hear all about Moonbeam Multimedia.
Latest news, resources, upcoming episodes, stuff like that. So
Yeah.
check us out, 16to1.com.
Your other threatening moment for this episode.
No.
Yes,
no.
it's a threat.
No, gentle reminder.
Tomorrow is
it's
the
a gentle
last day
reminder.
of Teacher Appreciation Week. Tell them you love them.
This week has been, when this episode comes out, has been Teacher Appreciation Week, and you have a mere 24 hours
Yeah.
to express your adoration
Go get that 12-pack.
to the teachers in
You
your
know
life.
what? Make it a case.
Okay.
Maybe a 30.
Okay. Shall we move on to our education news headlines for the week?
You go for it.
All right. So we're starting off in Tennessee, where Governor Bill Lee has signed a controversial law that would allow some teachers and staff to carry concealed handguns on school grounds without making other employees and parents aware. Those carrying guns on school grounds would have to clear a background check, go through 40 hours of handgun training, and would have to carry written consent from the school's administration and local law enforcement. They're allowed to have it on their person. The law prevents anyone from carrying at school events at stadiums, gymnasiums, or auditoriums. And the legislation has sparked significant debate and criticism, particularly from educational and activist groups who argue it could increase risks rather than improve safety. Despite the passage of the law, some school districts in Tennessee have expressed intentions not to allow their teachers to be armed under their jurisdiction, citing existing security measures, including the presence of armed school resource officers.
I do think it's weird that it's a secret. Who gets to carry? I think that's weird.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when this kind of thing first started popping up in response to school safety issues. People were like, oh, yes, let's arm teachers. And it just prompted me to think back to when I was in grade school and some of the teachers I had, and whether as a student, you know, if I were like, I wonder if this person has a gun, whether that would have made me feel more or less safe. And in many cases, it would have made me feel less safe.
Sure.
Rather than more safe, to know that some of those people might have guns just laying around. So I feel like this is a, unfortunately, largely symbolic piece of legislation, although it also has obviously extreme practical implications. It seems to be saying something more about the political situation than it does about school and student safety. So that's pretty unfortunate. And there's some pretty vociferous protesting going on at the State House while this was passed. People were escorted out and all kinds of stuff. So it wasn't without debate, but we'll keep following this story as it evolves. Okay, what's our second headline? This one is a wild story.
Okay. Baltimore, Maryland.
Yeah.
This has been going on since the end of 2023. People first heard of it, though, in January of 2024. So a recording went viral of Maryland's Pikesville High School's principal, Eric Eiswert, making racist and anti-Semitic comments.
Yeah.
So following the release of that recording, the principal, Eiswert, was placed on administrative leave, and he stood firm that it was not his voice on the recording, but instead an AI deepfake that had been released. So a little bit of background for what was happening at the school. At Pikesville High School, the principal, Icewert, had been dealing with some issues with the athletic director.
Yeah.
And his name is Dejan Darian. And Darian, the athletic director, his job was already in jeopardy because of a payment issue that had been made to someone that he said was a coach earlier in the school year, which turned out to maybe not be true.
Oh.
So the principal and the athletic director already had been going back and forth about
so many twists
issues,
and turns. Okay.
So as soon as this recording came out, the principal, Eric Icewert, was like, it has to be the athletic director. Okay. So they put the principal on administrative leave because the athletic director and 2 other teachers received an email from a Gmail user, and attached to that email was this sound file.
Okay, he sent it to himself and 2 other teachers?
Yes.
Okay.
From another Gmail account.
Wow.
Okay.
That's very subtle.
Now,
So subtle.
on top of it, one of the teachers who received the email shared it with a student who immediately put it on social media.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
So, as part of this investigation, the principal stood firm the entire time it was not him. Officials subpoenaed Google to get the IP address of where the email that had sent the file had been created, and they were able to trace it to a relative of the athletic directors.
Oh, no.
And on top of that, they were able to confirm that his phone number had been the one used as the recovery contact.
Oh, no.
I know.
Oh, no.
So investigators worked with 2 forensic experts, including an FBI contractor, and were able to confirm that there were traces of AI-generated content in that recording.
Wow.
Now, if you hadn't heard of it in January, you probably heard of it last week for this reason. So following that discovery, authorities obtained an arrest warrant for the athletic director, Darian, and the next day, he went to BWI Airport and tried to board a flight to Houston. He was stopped and questioned because he had a gun with him, and the officials at the airport were investigating the way that his gun had been packed for the flight.
Did he try to put it in his carry-on or something?
I think it was improperly stored. As they were investigating this, they found out that the previous day, an arrest warrant had been issued for him.
Whoops.
The athletic director was released on $5,000 bond. He waived an attorney at an initial court appearance.
Oh, no.
He's been charged with theft, retaliating against a witness, and multiple crimes related to the alleged use of AI to impersonate. So
Yeah, we're going to start to see more and more of this as these generative AI tools become a little bit smarter. I think we're going to experience a wave of people trying to get away with stuff like this. For retaliation purposes and stuff, and I think it'll get pretty ugly.
And I'm just really happy that I'm not someone working at any level above that principal at these high schools and in that school district, because I would not want to have to navigate what to do with the principal who was placed on administrative leave, and as well as dealing with an athletic director and other employees who are now implicated. I'm just really happy I don't have to sit in that HR
That's a mess.
hellhole.
That's a tangle.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
Okay. What else we got?
Okay. This week marked the anniversary of the Kent State shootings, which occurred on May 4th in 1970 when the Ohio National Guard opened fire on unarmed college students protesting the Vietnam War at Kent State University in Ohio, right down the road from us, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others. This grim anniversary passes against a backdrop of renewed campus protest activity across the country, as colleges and universities have transformed into protest sites for student-led movements, demanding that universities cut financial and academic ties with Israel. To date, more than 2,100 people have been arrested during protests at college campuses. Protests have occurred at schools including Columbia, UCLA, Yale, NYU, the University of Minnesota, Northwestern, Rutgers, Brown, UC Berkeley, MIT, Tufts, University of Michigan, Emerson College, and Ohio State, just to name a few. The scale and fervor of these protests are significant, drawing comparisons to past major student movements, and they've been met with mixed reactions from university officials who have been increasingly mobilizing law enforcement to clear encampments and occupied buildings. We'll keep an eye on this as it evolves, I think, with graduation season coming up and
End of the academic year.
Commencement season is upon us, and I think there's probably going to be even louder discourse about this in the coming weeks as schools dismiss for the summer. So we'll provide updates as they happen. So this episode, we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, which makes me feel like I'm back in, what, 8th grade again?
Roughly.
I think. The American Industrial Revolution, just to be clear, because there were others elsewhere, even though we like to sometimes speak as if there weren't. But the Industrial Revolution here in America, and my inspiration for doing this episode actually came out of our 100th episode conversation and the interview with Terry, who was your teacher mentor that we had. She was talking a lot about how schooling hasn't changed in some important fundamental ways over the course of her decades-long career. And that was, giving her some pause. And she was saying these things haven't even changed in, maybe 100 years or more than that in some cases. These ways that we think about public schooling and education and preparing students to, become citizens and workers and whatever it may be. We haven't paused to maybe rethink the influence of a particular moment in history on how we first set up our school system. And yeah, I guess I'll also say that teacher education programs tend to focus on this time period in American history as being really important to the development of public schools and schooling. I know that at Teachers College, we definitely spent a lot of time on it. That had at least something to do with the fact that Horace Mann was making waves during this time. And we have a whole episode on Horace Mann. If you'd like to check it out, put it in the show notes. But the time of rapid industrialization in the United States did a lot of defining of what school systems, the public school system looks like. So I just wanted to go back and spend a little time interrogating it and see whether or not we might need to pause and take a breath and reevaluate where we are in terms of social and cultural and economic norms and see whether we might need a totally new way of doing schooling now to accommodate the ways in which we've changed. So before we get into that, you're the sort of history expert of the two of us. What is the Industrial Revolution?
Okay. So United States Industrial Revolution. If you're considering a time frame, we're talking like mid-early 1800s to early 1900s.
Okay.
Just as kind of a rough century of time to work with.
Got it.
So according to the Library of Congress, the Industrial Revolution took place over more than a century as production of goods moved from home businesses, where products were generally crafted by hand, to machine-aided production in factories. This revolution, which involved major changes in transportation, manufacturing, and communications, transformed the daily lives of Americans as much as, and arguably more than, any single event in U.S. history. It starts in early mid-1800s, right? So what United States sees, especially after the American Civil War, which was 1861 to 1865, the U.S. has established itself as an industrial giant. So the industries that we already had that existed expanded, and then the United States also started with petroleum refining, steel manufacturing, and then electrical power. On top of those, we also have railroads expanding. And so those railroads are able to bring in all parts of the country, even the most remote rural areas. And now everybody has a part in the economy, which until that point hadn't really been the case. But what this did create for the United States is now we have a new class of wealthy industrialists and a considerably prosperous middle class. We also have a huge blue-collar working class. And that labor force is made up of millions of newly arrived immigrants and also migrants from rural areas. These workers are normally unemployed for part of the year, and they earn low wages, and that's where we see kind of the cut to labor unions playing such a critical role. And we also see that farms are having a harder time keeping up with the new technology, and so lots of young people start flooding to the cities to find better job opportunities.
Right.
So America's really shifting. Like, this is a huge change in what we were and had been into what we were trying to become and kind of the growing pains through which we did that.
Modern day economists and historians will argue that all of this industrial change led to a huge spike in demand for skilled workers, and then this in turn had this impact on the education system, and it caused or maybe was an effect. I don't know. I think we'll leave that up to the discussion to see, but public education is kind of transforming alongside it at the same time. And as we were researching for this episode, I pulled this really interesting research article, authors Alexander James Field. The article is called Educational Expansion in Mid-19th Century Massachusetts, Human Capital Formation or Structural Reinforcement, which is a mouthful, but it was
Okay.
pretty interesting. He's focusing on Massachusetts because that's where Horace Mann is doing the bulk of his work. And again, if you want more context on Horace Mann, go check out our episode. But Horace Mann does a lot to shape what public schooling looks like in America, even to this day. So we have this, interconnected rise of public education and industrialization. This scholar is kind of making the argument that it's difficult to tell whether industry demanded more skilled labor or whether the sort of captains of industry, the elite class at that time, saw public education as a way to maintain social order. Both of those things can be true at the same time, but this guy was actually arguing even that the sort of elite wanting to maintain a stranglehold on American norms is maybe even more a force in why public education became what it did. And I mean, a lot of that is in response to, like you were mentioning, there's a huge shift in labor. We go from more agricultural workforce to a more manufacturing centered one. We have stuff like unemployment becoming super visible in the country for the first time, because we've got like city centers and population density is increasing, and there's just more obvious signs of economic distress when it starts to happen. And at this point, we've got an existing public school system that's kind of falling into physical disrepair. It's also the fact that the teaching profession is not particularly professionalized or credentialed in the way that it is now at this time. So there are all kinds of people who are becoming teachers who maybe aren't the most qualified folks in the world. And then we also got this recognition from classical economists and social leaders at the time that there's some sort of interconnectedness between schooling and the efficiency of a workforce.
Right.
There's this by fun, I mean kind of dastardly pull quote from John Stuart Mill, where he's talking about the moral qualities of the laborers. He was saying something along the lines of like, oh, think how much effort and money is expended on the problem of making sure that workers are doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a thorough system of moral education so that workers everywhere would want to just stay on task when they're supposed to be working?
I just wish they brought a pencil to class, It's just not even... Our hopes are very high, sir.
But I think we're also starting to see similar questions kind of pop up in today's labor market with increasing automation and demands for some new approach that emphasizes like digital literacy and information literacy and problem solving and adapting, being adaptive, especially for a future where the jobs that exist now won't exist. I feel like that's been the problem for quite a while, is how do we have a systematized approach to education in this country that prepares people for jobs that do not exist?
Yeah, that's a good point. My kids this week took aptitude tests. It was just really interesting to hear them all talk about these aptitude tests, because those aptitude tests are kind of doing the same thing, right? Like, how do we turn your skills into something that is the most productive for your employer?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this reminds me of, is just, like that hope of him, right? Like he wanted a strong moral education to help make sure that they were going to be good workers and that they would do the right thing and make the right choices. And these aptitude tests are looking at these kids saying, this is what you probably should try to do based on how you're wired, because otherwise you might not do well at it. And I think a lot of my kids were like, wait a minute, what do you mean? So it's just interesting.
Well, I will say that I feel like there's a little bit of a disconnect with the education system, because the education system doesn't necessarily, right now, at least it didn't for me. I'll just speak for myself and not generalize. It didn't necessarily help me figure out what I was good at or best at in terms of what I should maybe seek to do as a career. It sort of just was like, well, what do you want to do? And then here are some ways that you might do that. But it's got to be hard for people who don't already have a predetermined idea of what they want to do. I think it's a little more difficult to help people approach that conversation.
For sure.
Anyway, in addition to education being shaped by industrial forces, it's shaped in a way to reflect those industrial forces. And I want you to walk us through some of these points a little bit, because these are going to sound very familiar to you. And to me, this just highlights how far we have to go in terms of revolutionizing our educational systems, because it feels archaic when you point to it. So shine a light on it. Where do we start?
The first one.
Yes.
This could be our whole list.
True.
Standardization.
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 Standardization. Standards.
Just
everywhere.
Standards. So many standards.
Standardization. Okay, what does that mean?
I mean, we love a test, right?
Oh.
We love to hold us to something. I'm speaking we broadly. I don't. But public schools, I mean, we're always talking about what our standards are, right? We talk about what our tests are like for every single person, regardless of anything about them that might make them unique. It doesn't matter. They get the same test, right? We want consistency. We want data that comes from these outcomes, and a standards approach allows that.
Yes. So that is much like a factory churning out uniform products.
Yes. They want the same thing over and over and over again.
Standardized curricula, standardized testing, consistency in educational outcomes.
All of these kids are being treated the exact same way, regardless of any talent, ability, whatever, right? We're churning out a product, and it will be consistent because they will have all met the same standards to be the product of a high school diploma.
Big yikes.
Right? Okay. Age segmentation?
As opposed to a one-room schoolhouse approach.
Yeah. We put them in
age-based grade levels.
We put them with their peers.
Okay, how is that like the factory system?
Well, it organizes everyone, of course. It's a systematic, sequential process. And so we keep them in this linear progression, or moving along this linear progression, because by this age they can do this. And it's just like the steps of a factory, right? First you do this, second you do that. We keep going until you're a product worth your while. But it's all of these clearly defined stages, basically. And it builds upon the previous stage. So much like building something in a factory would be.
Okay.
By the end, voila, you get a graduation hat and you go. Bye-bye.
Graduation hat.
A hat. You get the hat.
You get the hat. Okay. So far, so good.
I mean, this is what I like jokingly tell my students. My job is to get rid of you. Like, I tell my kids that every year. Like, you're going to miss us? I'm like, no, I get a whole new bunch of you next year. I just get more. That's kind of my job, is to move you on.
More educated sprocket.
Sure.
Okay.
That's what I like to call my students. Hello, sprocket. Okay. Right. Now, along with that comes the efficiency focus.
Efficiency?
Of course, schools will focus on maximizing whatever resources, right? Time, material, teachers, humans. Because we're trying to reach all of these students in this amount of time, much like these factories and businesses are trying to do, right? They're trying to get the most out of every dollar, every hour, every person.
Yeah.
And that isn't that different from what we do either.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like a cog in a machine. I want you to know.
If
the point of this episode was to make me incredibly aware, I am.
I think that you're going to be called out in the next bullet point even more aggressively, actually, because...
Teachers as a supervisor.
Yep.
Oh, I'm a line supervisor? Kind of. Okay, so line supervisors, they're tasked with managing large group of students, maintaining order, and ensuring that the educational production process runs smoothly. Oh no. Their role often extends beyond instructing to include monitoring progress and behavior. Oh my gosh. Paralleling factory supervisors. Yeah, that's my job. If you had to write a description for a teacher, that would be it. Maintain order. Educational production process runs smoothly. Instructing to include monitoring progress. We love a good progress report. We love a behavior report. Okay, good. I'm the best line supervisor for 10th grade English.
I'll take the next one because this one always made me irritated. And that's that the factory model thrives on predictability and conformity, which are qualities that are, frankly, I think, mirrored in traditional classroom settings. Students are expected to follow specific rules and procedures, and there's usually not a whole lot of room for deviation there. It's definitely an environment that encourages conformity and obedience, perhaps more than creativity and individual exploration.
For sure. This is frustrating.
I mean, it's a fair criticism of the modern educational public school model, I think. Okay, and then we also have like output-oriented evaluation.
And that's true because we love our test scores and our graduation rates. Just like a factory is going to measure success through their output quantity. Schools just measure that through test scores or graduation rates or any kind of test score really at any age level. And so, of course, then these metrics are for both student achievement and for the effectiveness of the teachers and the schools. And so all of this reinforces the end results rather than the learning, which I think is actually the most important part, but that's the part we care the least about, the learning.
Well, it's definitely, I think it's the part that the structure cares the least about.
Yeah.
Like the structure
Yeah,
of
we're just
school.
like, get there.
I don't mean to be like, oh, school is just cranking out unthinking automatons. I don't think that's what's happening, but I do think that a lot of the mechanisms that we use to determine what is successful in the school process are maybe outmoded now.
I mean, I don't think it's that far off, though, because you consider 90% of my life is kids fighting with me about grades. They never fight with me about how the learning went.
Oh, that's so interesting.
They only fight with me about how the grade went. I mean, that's exactly what this thing is reconfirming, right?
But your kids can tell, though. I do want to say, you will point out to me when your kids are like excited about the learning that happened that day. Yeah. You will be like, this worked because they were excited. So they're at least aware enough to know when it's good and bad for them and when they're more engaged. But maybe they're just not prompted to think about that explicitly as often as they should be.
Sure. I just mean that teachers don't get feedback about how somebody didn't learn something. They get feedback based on what the grade was.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about working really hard for a grade, even if it wasn't the grade that you thought you wanted. But that isn't what the reward is for students, right? The reward is not that I did something very hard and I worked my butt off for a B. And that's where the disconnect is because a lot of times success is a lot of things, but it's not the value of learning. It is the output of whatever the product is, right?
Yeah.
So that's hard.
It is hard. I just wanted to toss in this last one too, and that's that even the school bell itself harkens to factory like shift changing. I mean, and that's how we move from class to class in the modern public school still.
This is a kind of a weird connection, but I teach Elie Wiesel's Night, right, which is his story of the Holocaust. Wiesel was imprisoned at 5 different Nazi concentration camps by the end of the war when he was released. And he talks in one of the middle chapters of the book, he talks about how he was working in a factory for the Nazis, right, an electrical factory for some time. And he makes a comment in there about how when he dreamed of a better world, he dreamed of a world with no bells because he was so tired of hearing the bells. Wow. And of being released to food or to whatever because of the bells that the Nazi systems used. And I cannot tell you how many times that my students identify with that line. And I always walk like the very tightrope of like, how do we compare ourselves to a Holocaust survivor and their experience? But also identifying that a student hears someone who feels like his life is being ran by bells and they're sitting there thinking the same thing. Yeah. And it's always a really interesting conversation.
I mean, I think the students are right to pick up in the fact that this is like a form of behavior control, mass behavior control. And I don't mean it in the school sense that it's automatically nefarious, but it does make you wonder, why don't we trust students to get up and manage their own schedule? For example,
because some of them wouldn't come to my class at all.
Right. I mean,
I have a guess.
Thing. Yeah, but do you think that is because they have become so dependent on a system that if we took it away, they can't manage for themselves? Do you think that they would be capable of getting from point A to point B if the habit that we inculcate becomes you have to manage your own schedule because that's what it's like to be out in the world, is to manage your own schedule? It really is a question. Yeah. I think it would be a mixed bag of success, but that is the kind of question that I'm interested in.
I mean, you sort of make those decisions when you go to college, you know?
Yeah.
Like, college didn't have bells. You were there on time. Class was over at this time.
Or my college did have bells, actually.
Oh, so mine didn't.
Yeah.
You would be sitting there doing the awkward thing of like, I have 5 minutes to get to my next class. It's in the next building and this professor is still talking. So do like I get up and walk out, or like, is that like,
you just made me have like a what's the most flashback to my freshman year just now.
Like what's the most polite response to somebody going over class time? You know, if like you're a building away. But anyways,
I had to get 2 professors of mine in my freshman year to like fight each other about that because one kept holding us back too late and the next one was like, why are you always late? Because it was a group of 5 of us, just because of the way our classes were scheduled. It's like a core group of students that you all have classes together in that year. And so my core group was late every single time because of this one professor. And the next one was like, what's the deal? And we're like, talk to her. I don't know what to tell you. The adults need to fight about it.
So yeah, it's an interesting it's always interesting when the kids connect with Ellie that way in night, but it's also, I mean, it's no different than what we do in our adult lives, right? I'll be sitting in a meeting that's gone way past the time it was supposed to, and who am I to be like, well, thank you, it's time to go, you know? And
I mean, I think you can. I think that's,
yes,
lead the way, man. Take us on out of here.
But there's also when you're thinking of all the other things that the factory life has encouraged you to do, which is like be a good moral worker,
it's not to
then
stand
the thought
up.
of a good moral worker is not to be like, I'm leaving this meeting, goodbye. The good moral worker waits for the polite moment to be like, I must go now, you know, because I've been raised in it as well. So anyways, you have to like navigate the politeness of that thing. And that's something that students and everybody has to learn, right? I've sat in meetings that are much too long.
So here's how I look at that scenario. And of course, you're not allowed to think of it this way when you're the subordinate and your administrator is the one keeping you in the meeting. But in my estimation of that situation, it's the administrator who is not being polite to you because he's not being cognizant of your time.
Yeah, but I'm also just talking about like in the case of a meeting is over at 4 p.m. and it's 4:02 and they're in the middle of a thought. Like maybe I did have to leave at 4. I'm not going to run out at 4:02 while someone's in the middle of a thought to be
Makes
like,
sense.
screw you,
just, like,
look at
stand
the
up
clock, idiot.
Stand up and leave.
Yeah, like now there are plenty of other times in which I have to be like, okay, I know what we're doing here and unfortunately I cannot do this any longer. Like that's fine too. But yeah, I just mean you have to learn that give and take. And that's a hard thing for teenagers to learn.
Yeah.
And it's hard for adults to learn, obviously. So
So I'm going to zoom out a little bit from some of those particulars and just ask you as an educator with experience here, how you think that the way in which schooling is designed reflects our cultural and economic priorities at a given point in history.
I feel like I just answered that one sort of.
Yeah.
Right, that our priorities are that you get a grade, you get an A or whatever, you get 2 pass. We don't value the learning that it takes to do that because GPAs and things like that matter. Right?
So what are the cultural and economic priorities that dictate that that's how school is going to be? Because I agree with you, but like, what do you think it is more broadly in our culture that's going on that is causing the educational experience to be like that?
I mean, we value certain colleges more than other degrees, right?
So like, what, elitism?
Could be.
Of?
Yeah.
Or like, it's like the concept of meritocracy has taken such hold, or like extreme individualism. These things have taken such hold that the entire system is now oriented around this just one kind of result, which is the result of sort of like the efficiency of this process.
I mean, I think there's also like a rat race element, right? That like our students are starting college degrees at younger and younger ages. And it's because the thought of success now looks like a college degree for a lot of things. And I think that's a factor too, is that I think we're rushing a lot of kids out of this really important time of their lives because we've scared them by not getting ahead.
Well, we've also put anyone who doesn't go through this process at warp speed at such an economic disadvantage.
And this is something I talk to my kids about a lot. And it's like, you only get to be a teenager this once, right? You're going to be working and doing all these things forever. And I don't think that it's always valued to be a teenager, to have this experience, to live now, because you're so worried about trying to get ahead for what's next. And so it's very hard to be present and in the moment. And I remember my parents flat out being like, we want you to be a kid because you only get so much time to be a kid. And you have to be ready to be an adult for when it comes.
I still wonder how we shift priorities, like as a country, for example. How do we shift priorities so that none of that is the case anymore? We aren't just doing this just to do it. We're doing it because we think that it is important that students graduate from school and immediately start contributing in the most efficient way possible to the workforce.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just saying it seems like cultural and economic priorities have to shift away from that being the highest good in order for us to revolutionize schooling. How feasible is it to shift toward a more personalized learning model? Like, what are the major things that are in your way in your classroom right now that prevent you from individualizing education and, you know, kind of minimizing some of the less pleasing effects of this factory model?
Money.
So maybe we should stop defunding public education? Is that what you're saying?
Class numbers are too large. We don't have the money to support that type of learning. We need more teachers. We need people to stop leaving education. We need to pay teachers more. How feasible is it? I'd say based on how it's going, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, we can barely afford the schools that we do have, and they're not thriving. So it's not feasible with what's happening. So yeah, I think the major challenges are just money. In terms of affording teachers to cut down on class sizes to make individualized learning more possible.
So systemic investment in the public education system.
Yeah,
is something
taxes, all of it. I mean, it's just, that's the biggest one. Mm-hmm. So it's not feasible.
Let me ask, if you could envision a less factory-oriented model, how do you think your job would change?
I feel like we'd be seen more as like mentors.
Seen more as mentors.
Yeah, like we would more be like kind of like guiding them through like projects or something like that. More like
so more student driven.
Yeah, I think it'd definitely be more student driven, but I also think that maybe that hard line between like teacher student might be a little bit more cushy because of the opportunity to like work together or something like that. Like I could see projects and things like that kind of occurring and
so less
and like a
expertise
back and forth.
Staged on the stage kind of thing.
Yeah,
and
I think so.
More as like a cooperative learning effort.
For sure. I think that'd be cool.
Do you think that your peers across the board would be comfortable with that kind of like?
Not everyone.
You probably have peers who are more comfortable in this age on the stage way of operating, right?
Well, it's safer. It's much safer to be the sage on the stage.
Why do you think that is?
Because you're far from them. You're unreachable. You're a podium yourself, you know, like
you're a podium.
I mean, you are a thing in the front of the room that speaks, and you are not human, and you are just kind of this voice. And I think that's safer because there's a disconnect between those things.
It's less risky too because there's less of an opportunity for you to be like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And there's very little I don't know in those cases, and that's a safe place to be.
So the fear of being shown to not know is a feature of this factory model, basically.
Oh, yeah. You don't want to not know something because if your peers know it, then you weren't, you know, whatever. But I think teachers would probably be afraid to shift what that looks like. Also because it is hard to be questioned. I know I've talked about this before. It's hard to say you're wrong.
Do we think that this system is responsible for that, though? I personally think that the whole framework where we're afraid to be shown that we're wrong is a result of this. It is the case that we are afraid to be shown to be wrong, but like the why?
I think it's hard as a teacher because you're expected to know everything. And I don't think that's actually the point of a teacher. And so I think that a teacher on a stage is so well rehearsed on what they say and what questions that are allowed that they don't often get pushed on those outer edges that would encourage anything new. And so challenging that would then open up two more questions, right? Or two other things. And there's definitely been days when I had like a whole thing prepped about whatever I was going to talk about, and then we totally get off topic, and I'm just standing there like, this wasn't what I was expecting, and I'm not really prepared for this. I've talked about this a million times, but I've had to learn to be comfortable in saying I don't know, and I'll find out, or I'll look it up. And it's because teachers are viewed as these oracles of answers and informations and information, and so it's very scary to say you don't know, and it's very scary to be out in the gray where you don't have a plan for it.
But I
think that's where some of the best learning happens,
for sure. But that's what I'm trying to get at is like, why is it? It's scary because why isn't the
you don't know what's coming?
But why is the unknown? Why is the not knowing?
Because there's a certain element of teenagers that you like to be prepped for. Because they're scary.
Well, I mean, even so for them. I'm not even talking about just you teachers, though. But like, I think students share that. I think the thing that you're expressing fear about as the teacher is the same thing that students express fear about as students in this system. There's the fear to be shown that you don't know. Yeah,
because everybody wants to be competent or to know or to whatever.
Right, but how do we change those stakes? Because it's like...
Oh, well, then you have to go back to first grade when everybody didn't laugh at you for not knowing the answer to something.
Okay.
Right? I mean, how many of us don't like have a memory of being called on when our hands weren't up to answer a question that you don't know, and then everybody looks at you, and
so
then
it's
you have
how
no
we're socialized, kind of, just from the beginning.
in those experiences. Yeah, I'd say it's socialized, because then everybody's looking at you, and you're sitting there like a little dweeb without the answer. That's hard.
Well,
and then that doesn't build any confidence in kids to raise their hands.
Right, sure, but that whole system is predicated on a form of knowledge exchange where an expert is eliciting answers from learners and expecting the correct answer. So, like, I guess that's all I'm saying is, like, I think we can interrupt these processes.
Yeah.
I think we can change them, but I think it requires going back to the workbench.
I mean,
from day one.
I don't cold call kids.
Uh-huh.
If a kid doesn't have their hand up, I don't call on them.
Yeah.
I do not cold call kids.
Yeah.
Now, if a kid's being a squirrel, they're going to get called on, but it's because I know what you're doing over there. But if I have kids willing and eager and they're paying attention and they just don't have their hand up, I'm not going to call on them.
Uh-huh.
Because it's because I want them to trust me.
Right. It's designed to, like, embarrass and put you on the spot.
Yeah. And, like, there's some kids that'll be like, oh, I'm not really sure, but I'll try. I'm like, awesome, try. You know, and so by the end of the year, I get a lot more kids who are willing to try because they know I'm not going to do that to them because they trust me to not embarrass them.
So I think I'm just saying, like, can we organize our classrooms such that we're not setting up peers to disparage peers when learning is still just happening, when people are still caught in the learning process and therefore might make a misstep or might misremember or whatever it is.
Yeah, but that also is going to require the unlearning of these kids to think that they're better or funnier or something like that because they knew something their friend didn't.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect of that.
It's that thing,
there's only
like,
so much that teachers can do.
Again, that kind of like meritocracy, the unfortunate side effects of meritocracy, which is that kids are always ranking themselves against one another.
No, it's because that's what we raise them to do, right? That's what we value.
Because we don't.
You get picked first, you get picked last. Or we pass out tests in order of who did best to worst or worst to best or something like that.
Right. We don't think of schooling in terms of a cooperative learning project. We think of it in terms of the outcomes in the forms of grades.
Just a constant competition.
Interesting. Okay. Wrap up thoughts about this. I think that's pretty much all I was wondering about. I think we're ready for a new model. I think we're ready for a model that is less concerned with who's best by an arbitrary standard, like a GPA or whatever it may be, and ready for something that says who can figure out how to get people to work together on really interesting problems.
Yeah.
This is a trivia portion of the show where we ask you questions, and if you know the answer, go ahead and write into us, hello@16to1.com. That's our email address. We'd love to hear from you. If you write to us with the correct answer, send us your mailing address too, and we'll send you some 16 to 1 stickers. And even if you don't send us the correct answer, we'll still send you stickers. So reach out, say hello. So what was last episode's question?
Okay, here we go. If you were around in the 1990s, you will very likely remember the ads for Hooked on Phonics. It was originally created in 1987 and was all over TVs in the 90s, suggesting they could teach kids everything they needed to know if their parents or whomever just bought them Hooked on Phonics.
Yes, true.
At its height, how much was Hooked on Phonics bringing in yearly? Over $100 million a year to sell Hooked on Phonics.
More than $100 million
online
revenue.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Online. I mean, like via the phone. Sorry, not online. But
yeah, this was
yeah, we were calling in.
the pre-internet era.
We were calling in at 11
I think there was
p.m.
an
when the TV was
number.
off. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
What you got?
Well, this episode's question is about our factories and industrial revolution theme. Okay. So this organization was an American labor union of shoe workers formed in Wisconsin in 1867. It soon reached a membership of 50,000 or more, largely in the Northeast. However, it was poorly organized and faded away by 1874. They fought to prevent the introduction of new machinery and worked to keep immigrant labor out of the workforce. It was competition for them.
Yeah.
Not great. So what was that large labor union? What was that union called? You want to move on to what we learned in the past couple of weeks? You want to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was listening to a couple of different books by Dr. Susie Edge, and one of the books talked about the ways in which famous royals had died.
Okay.
And
one of your favorite topics.
we love
Suspicious royal deaths.
We love those.
Okay.
So anyways, in it, talked about how so many people suffered from the lack of vitamin C, right? Which is very important for humans.
Oh, that's how you get scurvy, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So what I learned, though, is that most animals actually make their own vitamin C. But unluckily for us humans and apes and some others, we can't make it. And so that's why we are susceptible to scurvy and things like that. Other illnesses from not enough fruits is because our bodies do not produce vitamin C. And so we have to supplement it.
I wonder why our genes didn't bless us with that.
And some animals have over time stopped doing it as well.
What a weird...
Yeah, so we have to get our own vitamin C, which is why I buy mine store-bought and take it daily.
Store-bought is fine.
Store-bought is fine. Do you know that?
I don't think I did.
Yeah. I don't know what I thought everybody was doing with their vitamin C, but I guess I didn't think anybody got it for free, but some people do. Well, some animals do, not people.
Okay.
So avoid scurvy by loading up on your vitamin C.
I will try to do that.
All right, what did you learn?
Well, it was in the news, so, you might have heard, but the Federal Communications Commission voted to restore net neutrality rules, which is something that you've heard me whinge.
We've all heard
about.
you whinge about
You've
this.
all heard me whinge about this.
If you've listened to 5 episodes, any 5 episodes of this podcast, you have gathered enough to know Chelsea does some whinging about net neutrality.
This is one of my favorite whinges. So this vote restored net neutrality rules after that 2017 repeal. Vote passed with a 3-2 margin. It was along party lines, reinstated the regulations. And just as a refresher, those prevent broadband providers, internet service providers from blocking or throttling traffic. And it also classifies broadband as a telecommunications service, which means it's a common carrier in case you're a nerd who cares about that sort of stuff. The rules are expected to face legal challenges, may be unstable depending on future political shifts. It's kind of similar to what's going on with the FTC and non-disclosure agreements, that ruling that also just happened. Personally, I'm an open internet kind of person, so I don't hate this, but I also think there is going to continue to be a rules question. I think that by and large, our legislators are not well equipped to deal with the realities of the internet. That's not their bread and butter, to understand the intricacies of how this stuff works. So it's a little scary.
Yeah.
When you think about how far behind our legislation is to the realities of mass communication, but it's just my personal beef.
For sure.
I'll just keep whinging about it probably. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, that's what I learned.
Carry on whinging.
We shall see.
Anything else?
I don't think so. That about wraps it up for me. How about you?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Well, then we will see you in 2 weeks.
I hope the rest of May is maybe a little bit kinder to those of us with seasonal allergies.
Yes. End of school year blessings upon you.
We'll see you all soon.
Bye.
Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. You know how cats will do that thing where they lay their entire head face down?
Yes.
They'll lay a loaf, and then they put their paws out in front, and they just go face down. If I could make my body do that, that is the position in which I would like to be.
I see.
I want to be Sphinx, loaf, face down, face palm. That's May as a teacher.